Before I start a novel, there's one thing that I often do, and I don't have to necessarily do it before I start the novel, but it's usually right in the beginning process somewhere. My first step is I think about what it is I want to accomplish with a novel. Let's say you go out jogging and you go running and you go, gosh, I just ran 2 miles. I wonder how fast I ran it in. If you're not measuring yourself, if you're not setting goals, it's pretty tough to beat your performance the next time that you go out jogging. You might go out 2 days later and you'll wonder, oh gosh, I just ran 2 miles. I wonder if I ran it as fast as I did last time. Well, you've got to get a stopwatch and you've got to measure out 2 miles exactly, and you look at your performance, and maybe a quarter of the way through your jog, you look at your watch and say, oh, I've got to boost my speed a little bit here. Maybe you get a minute into it and you're going, oh, I'm feeling a little bit winded. Maybe I need to slow it down a little bit so I don't run out of steam halfway through. And basically you gauge your performance and see if you're doing it well. I do the same thing with my writing, and there's a couple different ways to gauge your performance. There's actually 3 ways that I can set goals. One goal that I might set with a book is I might say, I want this book to be of very high quality. And I might say that I want this book to be, for example, the best book of its kind. Okay, maybe the best pirate book ever. And so what you have to do is you have to educate yourself and say, what are the other best pirate books out there that have ever been written? And you can go back and you read something like Treasure Island, and you can read Robinson Crusoe, and you can read Swiss Family Robinson, and you can read On Stranger Tides by Tim Powers. You can go back and look at what the comparables are. And from that, you now know what the target is that you have to hit. How good is good going to be? One of my students years ago was a fellow named Dan Wells. And I remember Dan at one point, I asked him what he wanted to do with his career. And he said, I kind of want to be the Stephen King of young adult. And I thought, well, that's a weird goal, But nobody else is doing it. And so why not? And so Dan wrote a series of books called I'm Not a Serial Killer, about a teenage boy who's a serial killer, but is denying it to himself. He's basically nuts. He thinks a demon is trying to kill people in town, when in reality it's him. Very creepy book, okay? Dan did an excellent job at writing it. He succeeded maybe beyond his wildest dreams, became a huge hit back in Europe, made enough money with each book that just on his German rights alone, he's making 4 times as much as an average worker here in the U.S., probably more. And then he sold it in the U.K. and the U.S. too, and he was doing great with those books. So he set quality goals, is what he did. But there are other types of goals. One goal that you can set is that maybe you decide that you want to become an international bestseller. When Stephanie Meyer was my student at BYU, a couple of years after Dan Wells, she came in and she said one day, I want to talk to you. She said, I want to find out, what do I have to do to become the best-selling young adult writer of all time? So we sat down and we talked about it for an hour and a half. So her goal was to become a bestseller. And so we talked about what you need to do to become a bestseller. Now, becoming a bestseller doesn't necessarily mean that you have high critical acclaim. It means that you're going after a wide audience. And she did that very well. We talked about, when you write this book, this romance, are you going to be targeting male and female audiences or just a female audience? And she says, well, I'd like to have the boys come in too. And so I had to talk about, okay, you have to add enough adventure that the boys want to read it too. And it can't all just be romance if we do that. And so she had to alternate her romance and her adventure beats, chapter by chapter. So it's possible to sit down and try to figure out how to appeal to a wide audience. And if that becomes your goal, great. Just realize that too often when you do that, what you don't get is critical acclaim. You get jealousy from other authors. I remember when Stephen King wrote Carrie, hearing other authors talking about how he was so terrible he couldn't write his way out of a paper bag, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, he's a perfectly good writer, okay, as he's proved amply over the past 30 years. But the same kind of thing happened when J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter. I heard other fantasy authors saying she has no imagination. She's just rehashing the kids going to wizard school stories, that all of us have written, et cetera, et cetera. And I felt they were wrong. She did have something. She did know how to appeal to a wide audience. And I remember when I first read her, I thought she may be the greatest genius at writing to a wide audience of anybody I've ever seen. I felt like she really knew what she was doing. Having wide audience appeal is one thing. John Grisham is another author who got famous fast and faced a lot of criticism for his writing because a lot of people who were winning awards and stuff felt that he wasn't anywhere near as good as them. Well, he was good. You can be a genius at any number of things as a writer. And being a genius at appealing to a wide audience is one area that some people can do great at, and yet they may not have other writing skills that other people have. They may not be as great at characterization or voice. So you can set goals that say, I want to be a bestseller, and that's a justifiable goal. A third kind of goal that you can set, though, is that you can set a goal that says, I want to get great critical acclaim. I want to get great reviews, because if I can do that, then that becomes my means for selling. It means I've got a bunch of people who are basically saying, I am worthy, okay? And so winning awards is also something that you may want to do when you're publishing. And you can study how to win awards. Okay, I used to write as a prize writer back in college, and I sat down and I said, okay, how can I win an award? And I started thinking about it and realized that if I was going to win awards, I had to be good in just about every category that a story could be good at. So I would look at my stories and I'd say, okay, what if the judges are really interested in voice? Well, I've got to make sure that each of my characters has distinct voices and distinct ways of thinking about things and seeing the world. And then I'd said, what if they're going to base it upon the concept of the story? Well, I've got to make sure that I've got a concept that they haven't seen before. That's something that's unique. And I'd look at it and say, what about if they want to judge it on the basis of characterization? I decided I needed to go back and really create my characters, create a background for them, and create their hopes and their dreams and their futures. And so I would go through and I looked at things like plotting and pacing and stylistic details, the use of metaphors and similes, and the use of poetic elements. And I went through there and I got a list of about 35 different things. And I said, I want to write my stories, and I want to try to, on a scale of 1 to 10, I want to try to be a 10 at every level on my story. And so I wrote my stories, and I had a goal in college that I wanted to win a large writing contest. And I sent off half a dozen short stories. And over the course of the next 3 or 4 months, I didn't just win one, I won all of them, including a large international contest that led to me getting my first 3-novel contract with Bantam Books. And so you can set goals to win contests, and you can do it smartly, you can do it intelligently. And if you do it and execute properly, you can win contests. I've proven that over and over again in my career. The point being here that that's a worthy goal too. If you can get the credibility that you need from the critics so that you can get great cover quotes put on the front of your book, it can be advertised to librarians, etc., then that's going to help establish you much more quickly as an author than if you just put a book out. But many writers, when they're new, they want to be humble about it, in part, I think. I think they all secretly want to win awards. They all want to be bestsellers. They all want to write beautifully, but they're afraid to voice those goals. And so one of the things that I suggest is that you sit down and you think about the goals for your story before you ever write it, goals for your novel, and sit down and imagine, for example, what do you want the reviewers to say about this book? For example, with my first novel, On My Way to Paradise, I sat down and I wrote and I thought, I want people to say that this is a powerful story, that it has some depth to it. And so I had a couple of goals, and I wrote down about 15 or 20 different goals of things I wanted to accomplish with the novel. I put it out, and sure enough, my very first review that I got said this is one of the deepest and most powerful science fiction novels ever written. And the book went on to become a bestseller for 5 months and won a Philip K. Dick Award. It's one of the best novels of the year, and got a lot of acclaim. But I think that it did it in part because I set that goal before I ever started writing. And I think you need to set your goals too. One of the goals that I set for it was I wanted to have some of the coolest battle scenes ever written. And I had a number of reviewers who said, you know, he's got the coolest battle scenes ever written. And it was funny because one of the reviewers was a teenager who was just crazy about the book and went on and on. And yet, he didn't see the depth. He didn't understand philosophically what was going on in the book. But he says, this has the coolest battle scenes ever. And I had to chuckle because that was just like one of my little goals that I had set for the novel. And you can set those kinds of goals. You can say, I want to have the most romantic romance scene ever. I haven't read all the romance novels in the world. I don't know who's written the most romantic scene ever. But you can sit down and read some very romantic scenes and try to figure out how you're going to approach it so that yours overpowers them. And if you can do that, then great. Your goals are going to take you a long way. But don't just sit down and be that jogger who doesn't know how fast they ran or how far they ran. They just feel winded when they're done. You want to sit down and try to create some measurable goals for yourself and then work towards those goals.